The massacre at Haven's edge. The golden wheat fields of New Haven stretched endlessly toward the purple horizon, swaying gently in the afternoon breeze of humanity's most prosperous agricultural colony. Children laughed as they chased each other through the grain, their voices carrying across the peaceful settlement that had become home to 2.3 million souls. Dr. Marcus Chen stood on his clinic's observation deck, watching the scene with quiet satisfaction. 5 years of hard work had transformed this barren world into a paradise. Captain Alina Vasquez guided her patrol ship Meridian through the outer system, conducting another routine sweep of humanity's expanding frontier. The Terran Federation had established dozens of colonies like New Haven, each one a testament to human determination and ingenuity. Unlike other species that expanded through conquest, humans built their empire through careful cultivation and peaceful growth. It was a philosophy that had served them well for over 2 centuries. The first sign of trouble came not from sensors or alarms, but from silence. New Haven's regular communications had stopped 6 hours ago, and now the Meridian approached a world that should have been buzzing with activity. Instead, Vasquez found herself staring at a planet wrapped in smoke and fire. The sprawling cities that had taken decades to build were nothing more than glowing craters. The agricultural domes that fed 3 neighboring systems lay shattered, like broken glass. "My God," whispered Lieutenant Torres from the sensor station. "Captain, I'm reading massive energy signatures. Multiple fusion detonations across the entire surface." This wasn't an accident. Vasquez felt ice form in her stomach. "Any survivors?" "Scanning now. Wait, I'm getting a weak signal from the northern continent. It's coming from the medical facility." The Meridian's shuttle bay opened, and Vasquez led a team down to the surface. The world that had once been a garden was now a wasteland of ash and radiation. The medical facility, built into a reinforced hillside, had somehow survived the bombardment. Inside, they found Dr. Marcus Chen, barely alive and connected to a failing life support system. "Captain," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "you have to know what happened. You have to tell Earth." Chun's testimony revealed the horrific truth. The Zephyrian Empire, a proud warrior race known for their honor and military prowess, had arrived 3 days ago. Their massive dreadnought had hung in orbit like a dark omen, while their general delivered an ultimatum. Humanity had 24 hours to abandon New Haven and return to their core worlds. The Zephyrians considered human expansion a sign of weakness, claiming that any species that spread through farming rather than conquest deserved only contempt. "We tried to negotiate," Chen continued, his medical scanner showing his vital signs. "Failing. Governor Martinez offered to share our agricultural technology. We had children here, Captain, families. The Zephyrians said that weakness bred weakness, and they would cleanse the galaxy of our contamination." The attack had been swift and merciless. Orbital bombardment lasted for 6 hours, targeting every city, every farm, every shelter. The Zephyrians had not sought conquest or resources, they had sought extinction. When it was over, 2.3 million human beings were dead, and the galaxy's most productive agricultural world was a smoking ruin. The general's name was Kieleth, Chen whispered with his final breath. He said humanity needed to learn its place in the universe. He said this was just the beginning. Captain Vasquez stood in the ruins of the medical facility, holding the datapad containing Chun's testimony. Around her, the ashes of 2.3 million innocent people stirred in the radioactive wind. She had served in the Terran Federation Navy for 15 years, had seen conflicts and disasters, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. The Zephyrians had not just attacked a human colony, they had committed genocide. The journey back to Earth took 3 days, and with each passing hour, Vasquez felt the weight of her cargo growing heavier. The testimony of Dr. Chen, the sensor readings from the bombardment, the evidence of systematic extermination. When the Meridian docked at Lunar Station, she was met by Admiral Sarah Thompson, head of Terran Defense Command. "The entire Federation Council is waiting for your report, Captain," Thompson said, her face grim. "The news from New Haven has already reached Earth. The public is demanding answers." The emergency session of the Terran Federation Council took place in the Great Chamber beneath Geneva, where representatives from humanity's 200 colonies gathered in holographic projection. The chamber, usually filled with debates about trade routes and resource allocation, now buzzed with barely contained fury. When Vasquez presented her evidence, the silence that followed was deafening. President Sarah Kim stood slowly, her voice carrying across the chamber. "The Zephyrian Empire has committed an act of genocide against the human race. They have murdered 2.3 million innocent civilians, including children, for the crime of building a peaceful society. They have declared that humanity's very existence is an abomination to be cleansed from the galaxy." The president's words echoed through the chamber, and Vasquez watched as the representatives of humanity's peaceful civilization transformed before her eyes. The farmers, scientists, teachers, and artists who had built humanity's interstellar empire in the span of 2 centuries were no longer thinking about crops and trade routes. They were thinking about survival. The Zephyrians believe that expansion through conquest is the only valid form of growth, Kim continued. They see our agricultural colonies, our research stations, our peaceful settlements as signs of weakness. They have made it clear that they intend to continue their campaign of extermination until humanity is driven back to Earth or destroyed entirely. Admiral Thompson stepped forward, her military bearing commanding attention. "Madame President, the Zephyrians have made a fundamental error in their calculations. They believe that because humanity expands through peaceful means, we are incapable of defending ourselves. They are about to learn otherwise." The vote was unanimous. For the first time in over a century, the Terran Federation authorized the activation of the Deep Space Defense Initiative. Hidden shipyards throughout human space, built during the early days of expansion when the galaxy was more dangerous, began receiving activation codes. Military facilities that had been maintained but never used suddenly burst into activity. Captain Vasquez watched from the observation deck as the orders went out across the quantum communication network. In the Tau Ceti system, asteroid mining stations revealed themselves to be massive weapons platforms. In the Alpha Centauri shipyards, construction berths that had been building cargo vessels for decades suddenly shifted to military production. On Mars, the great orbital rings that had been used for peaceful research opened to reveal vast fleets of warships that had been built in secret and kept in reserve. The Zephyrian Empire had destroyed 1 human colony and killed 2.3 million people. They had done so believing that humanity was weak, that peaceful expansion meant an inability to fight. They had assumed that a species that grew through farming and trade could never match the military might of a warrior race. In their arrogance, they had awakened something that had been sleeping for 2 centuries. Admiral Thompson stood beside Vasquez, watching as the first wave of warships began emerging from hidden bases throughout human space. "The Zephyrians wanted to teach humanity its place in the universe," she said quietly. "They're about to learn that our place is wherever we choose to put it. The activation signals reached the furthest corners of human space, and everywhere they touched, the machinery of war began to stir. Humanity had spent 2 centuries building a peaceful civilization, but they had never forgotten the lessons of their violent past. The Deep Space Defense Initiative was more than just a military contingency plan. It was a promise to every human being in the galaxy that their safety was guaranteed by the full might of their species. As the Meridian prepared to join the assembling fleet, Vasquez thought about Dr. Chun's final words. The Zephyrians had said this was just the beginning. They were right, but not in the way they had intended. The massacre at New Haven was indeed the beginning, but it was the beginning of their end. Humanity had tried to build a peaceful future among the stars, but when that future was threatened, they would fight with the accumulated fury of 400 billion souls. The Deep Space Defense Initiative was about to show the galaxy what happened when you murdered human children and called it cleansing. The Zephyrians had wanted to demonstrate their superiority through acts of genocide. Instead, they had awakened the sleeping giant of human civilization, and that giant was very, very angry. Asterisk. The Armada Awakens fleet, Admiral James Morrison, stood on the bridge of the massive dreadnought Retribution, watching as humanity's hidden strength revealed itself across the galaxy. The ship's tactical display showed a sight that would have been impossible to imagine just weeks ago. 700,000 human warships, each one a testament to centuries of careful preparation and quiet determination, were converging on the Zephyrian home system. The assembly had taken place in the dark spaces between stars, where human stealth technology could hide an entire armada from alien sensors. Ships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with the blue-white glow of advanced shield systems. These were not the converted cargo vessels or hastily assembled defense platforms that most species relied on during conflicts. These were purpose-built instruments of war, each one carrying the accumulated technological advancement of human civilization. Captain Elena Vasquez, now promoted to Commodore for her role in discovering the massacre, commanded the Vanguard fleet. From her new flagship, the Meridian's Dawn, around her, the familiar faces of her crew worked with quiet efficiency, but she could see the change in their eyes. The genocide at New Haven had transformed them all. They were no longer the peaceful explorers who had set out to patrol humanity's frontier. They were the instruments of justice for 2.3 million murdered souls. Admiral, reported the communications officer, we're receiving final confirmation from all fleet commanders. 700,000 ships are now in position. The home system is completely surrounded. Morrison nodded grimly. The Zephyrians had believed that their warrior culture made them superior to humanity's peaceful expansion. They had assumed that a species that built gardens instead of battlefields could never match their military might. They were about to learn that humanity's greatest strength was not their individual prowess, but their ability to unite in the face of extinction. The Zephyrian Empire's capital world of Zephyr Prime hung in space like a crimson jewel, its surface covered with the great fortress cities that had stood for 10,000 years. The planet's orbital defenses, considered among the strongest in the galaxy, bristled with weapons capable of destroying entire fleets. Emperor Zethkar stood in his throne room, confident that his world's legendary defenses would be more than sufficient to repel any human attack. Your Majesty, reported General Kyleth, the architect of New Haven's destruction, our deep space sensors are detecting some kind of disturbance at the system's edge. It appears to be a small human fleet, perhaps a dozen ships at most. The Emperor's laugh echoed through the throne room. A dozen ships. The humans send a dozen ships to avenge their dead farmers. This is even more pathetic than I expected. Order the third battle group to intercept them. Let's finish what we started at New Haven. But as the Zephyrian fleet moved toward the system's edge, their sensors began registering readings that made no sense. The dozen human ships were multiplying, their numbers growing exponentially as more and more vessels dropped out of hyperspace. The Zephyrian commanders watched in growing alarm as their tactical displays showed hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands of human warships materializing from what had appeared to be empty space. "This is impossible," whispered Admiral Dector, commander of the third battle group. "Our intelligence reported that humans maintained fewer than 1,000 military vessels in their entire fleet. How can there be so many?" The answer came from Fleet Admiral Morrison himself, broadcasting on all frequencies as the full scope of humanity's response became clear. "People of the Zephyrian Empire, I am Fleet Admiral James Morrison of the Terran Federation Navy. You are surrounded by 700,000 human warships. Your empire committed genocide against the colony of New Haven, murdering 2.3 million innocent civilians. You declared that humanity's peaceful expansion was a sign of weakness that needed to be cleansed from the galaxy." The Emperor's throne room fell silent as the broadcast continued. Outside, the great orbital stations were reporting sensor readings that their operators refused to believe. The space around Zephyr Prime was filling with human vessels, each one larger and more advanced than anything in the Zephyrian fleet. "You made two critical errors," Morrison's voice continued across the system. "First, you assumed that because humanity expands through peaceful means, we are incapable of defending ourselves. Second, you believed that your warrior culture made you superior to our civilization. You are about to learn that humanity's greatest battles are not fought by individuals seeking glory, but by entire civilizations united in common cause." Emperor Zethkar stood frozen before his throne, watching as his orbital defenses, the pride of his empire, were revealed to be utterly inadequate against the force now surrounding his world. The human fleet was not just larger than anything the Zephyrians had ever assembled. It was larger than anything they had ever imagined possible. "You have 24 hours to surrender unconditionally," Morrison announced, his words carrying the weight of 400 billion human souls. "The same amount of time you gave the people of New Haven before you murdered them. The difference is that we are offering you the chance to live." The ultimatum sent shockwaves through the Zephyrian Empire. On worlds throughout their territory, military commanders stared at sensor readings that showed human fleets emerging from hyperspace in perfect coordination. The species they had dismissed as weak farmers had revealed themselves to be the most formidable military force the galaxy had ever seen. General Kyleth, who had ordered the bombardment of New Haven, stood in the Emperor's throne room as reports poured in from across the Empire. Human fleets were blockading every major world, their numbers so vast that they blotted out the stars. The Zephyrian military, which had considered itself the finest in the galaxy, was outnumbered by a ratio of nearly 1,000 to 1. "How is this possible?" Kyleth demanded. "Our intelligence networks monitor every human shipyard, every military facility. Where did these ships come from?" The answer came from humanity's long-term planning and their understanding of the galaxy's true nature. For 2 centuries, humans had built their civilian infrastructure with dual purposes: mining stations that could become weapons platforms, research facilities that could produce warships, cargo vessels that could be converted to military use in a matter of hours. The Zephyrians had seen only the surface of human civilization, the peaceful facade that allowed them to expand without threatening other species. Ambassador Lu Wei, humanity's chief diplomatic representative, arrived at Zephyr Prime in a single, unarmed shuttle. The contrast was intentional and devastating. One human diplomat surrounded by 700,000 warships, delivering humanity's final terms to an empire that had thought itself supreme. Emperor Zethkar, Liu said calmly as he stood before the throne, humanity has always preferred negotiation to conflict. We offered your empire peaceful coexistence, shared technology, and mutual prosperity. You responded with genocide. The emperor, who had ruled through fear and military might for 3 decades, found himself unable to speak. The human standing before him represented a species that had just demonstrated capabilities beyond his comprehension. The fleet surrounding his world was not just a military force. It was a statement of intent from an entire civilization. The terms are simple, Liu continued. Complete surrender of all Zephyrian military assets, reparations for the families of those murdered at New Haven, full disclosure of all intelligence regarding your empire's expansion plans, and most importantly, a guarantee that no Zephyrian will ever again threaten human civilians. The Emperor's advisors whispered urgently among themselves, but their words were meaningless. The choice was not between surrender and resistance. It was between surrender and extinction. The human fleet had demonstrated that they possessed the capability to turn every Zephyrian world into another New Haven, and their presence made it clear that they would not hesitate to do so. You have 12 hours remaining, Liu said quietly. I would suggest you use them wisely. As the deadline approached, the full scope of humanity's transformation became clear. The species that had spent centuries building peaceful colonies and conducting quiet research had revealed themselves to be the most formidable military power in galactic history. They had not achieved this through conquest or aggression, but through the methodical application of their greatest strength, the ability to unite entire civilizations in common cause. The Zephyrian surrender came with 30 minutes to spare. Emperor Zethkar, flanked by his military commanders, broadcast his unconditional capitulation to the human fleet. The empire that had considered itself the galaxy's greatest military power had been brought to its knees without a single shot being fired. Fleet Admiral Morrison accepted the surrender from the bridge of his flagship, surrounded by tactical displays showing the largest military force in recorded history. 700,000 human warships, each one a product of centuries of careful planning and quiet determination, had achieved what no amount of diplomatic protests could have accomplished. The Zephyrian Empire believed that strength came from the ability to destroy. Morrison announced to his fleet, "They have learned that true strength comes from the ability to protect. The people of New Haven have been avenged, and humanity has demonstrated that we will never again allow genocide to be committed against our people." The aftermath of the Zephyrian surrender sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. Species that had dismissed humanity as peaceful farmers suddenly found themselves re-evaluating their assumptions. The Terran Federation, which had seemed content to expand slowly through agricultural colonies and trade routes, had revealed itself to be a sleeping giant, whose awakening had changed the balance of power among the stars. Captain Elena Vasquez, now commanding one of humanity's most advanced warships, stood on her bridge as the great fleet began to disperse. The Zephyrians had wanted to teach humanity its place in the universe. Instead, they had learned that humanity's place was wherever they chose to put it, and that the peaceful species that built gardens among the stars would fight with the fury of 400 billion souls when their families were threatened. The Deep Space Defense Initiative had served its purpose. but its message would echo through the galaxy for generations. Humanity had built their empire through peaceful means, but they had never forgotten that peace was only possible when backed by the strength to defend it. The Zephyrians had discovered the price of underestimating the sleeping giant of human civilization, and the galaxy would never make that mistake again. Asterisk.